Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Aditya here. Today we are diving into an incredibly important topic, that is API gateway security. So the first thing we will see overview of API gateway security mechanisms in this session. Securing your APIs is crucial, and AWS API gateway provides several powerful tools to help you to do that. Okay, and by the end of this course, you will know the importance of securing APIs in AWS. Okay, and we will cover IAM permissions, resource based policies, Cognito user pools, and Lambda authorizers. So, without any further ado, let's get started. Okay, the first topic we are going to cover is IAM permissions. Okay, first, let's talk about IAM permissions. Here, IAM means identity and access management, and IAM is a backbone of security in AWS. Right? We are all know that IAM is the backbone of security in AWS, and we have to see here with respect to API gateway how this IAM principles works. Okay, the first thing is right. You have to create an IAM policy. Creation of IAM policy, what it does is inside the IAM policy, what we have to define is what actions are allowed or denied. Okay, so we have to specify what actions of a particular service or user has to perform on API gateway, or what actions of a particular user or a service are denied on API gateway. And once you created an IAM policy, then you attach this policy to a user or role. Okay, so not only creation, you have to attach this policy to a particular user or a role. Okay, and when it comes to authentication, since you are using IAM policy, authentication is handled by IAM, and the associated policy manages the authorization also. Okay, since you are using IAM policy, authentication is taken care by IAM and authorization is taken care by IAM policy. And here we are assuming that the resource which is trying to access API gateway resides inside the same AWS account. Okay, so then only this IAM permissions will work. For example, if you are using an EC2 instance and if you are trying to access API gateway, then you can give some role to the EC2 instance and attach the IAM policy so that it is easy to API gateway to authenticate and authorize since both are in same AWS account. So that is the assumption here, and that is where IAM policies or IAM permissions also works here. Okay, so this approach is ideal when your API clients are within AWS. Okay, so here we're assuming these are internal AWS clients like EC2, Lambda, or some other IAM users. Okay, so it leverages the signature version 4. Okay, so you may think, right, how these users or this EC2 instance Lambda, how they authenticate or authorize with IAM, right? So for that it uses this thing, the security feature called signature v4, sig v4 in shortcut. Okay, where IAM credentials are securely passed in the request headers. So here, right, from an EC2 instance or from a Lambda or from an IAM user, what they will do is they will create this signature v4 in the header of your request. So once they create the signature v4 or once they included the signature v4 in the headers of your request, then IAM is able to parse it and able to understand, and it will give access to the users. So we'll see in an flow diagram so that you will get better clarity. Okay, so if you see, right, here we have an EC2 instance. Inside you have your client. For example, you are running your some client application here, and here, right, we are using only one AWS account. So this client application is sending a request, and since it is in an same AWS account, right, it can able to get this signature v4 header. So it create a request and it is attaching a signature v4 header and passing it to API gateway. Since API gateway receives this request with signature v4 header, API gateway will check with IAM. So IAM will take the signature v4 and authenticate and authorize and send back, right, the policy. So it checks the policy, and if the user has access, so here, right, if user has access to send back to the backend, then only it will allow. Otherwise, it will reject the request. So if it is good, then API gateway will route the request to the Lambda or any other AWS service, right? It will process and send back response to the client. So this is the flow. So this is how IAM permissions works within the same AWS account. Okay, I hope you understand this topic. And moving on to the next one, that is resource-based policies. Now let's explore these resource-based policies. And if you see these resource-based policies, which are similar to our Lambda resource-based policies only, okay, and allow you to control to your API more granularly also. The first and important thing is it gives you cross-account access. Okay, so you can allow API access from another AWS account also. Since we have already seen AWS IAM, so IAM with the same AWS account, right? You can use IAM permissions and you can able to access API gateway. And if you want to give the access to cross accounts, right? Then these resource-based policies will be useful to you. Here, right, it is not only resource-based policies, you have to combine this resource-based policy with AWS IAM also. So combination of IAM policy with resource-based policy allows API gateway to be accessed from cross account also. So the cross account is nothing but two different AWS accounts. So remember that. And right, one more advantage of using resource based policy is you can impose IP address restrictions. Okay, so you can limit access of your API gateway to a specific IP addresses or ranges. And finally, you can use VPC endpoints. So you can secure your API gateway to only allow requests from within a specific VPC. So not for all the users or not from all the networks from the cross account, right? It will only allow for a particular VPC only. So that VPC only can able to securely access your API gateway. Okay, so what will happen, right? It will add an extra layer of security. For your better clarity, I will show you how the resource based policy will look like. So if you see here, this is the resource based policy, right? And if you observe here, here we have a specific role. This is an AWS account. Okay, this account is trying to access this resource, right? It may be same account or this may be different account. Okay, so here it's same account, and here also, right? If you see this root account or root user can able to execute this one, this example API. So this is the resource based policy look like for an API gateway. Okay, I hope you understand, right? Resource based policies especially used for cross account access with the combination of IAM permissions. And IAM permissions when you use, if you have only the applications and the API both are resides in the same AWS account. And before moving to the next topic, until now we have seen about only AWS accounts, right? So if the client is in a particular AWS account, same account or different account, we can able to use this IAM and resource based policies. What if this user resides outside of the AWS, right? Maybe some on-premises server. So we need to see how that works, right? The first one is, or moving on to the next topic is Cognito user pools. So this is AWS solution for managing identity. So here, even though your users, right, they are or your client application, it is executing in an on-premises server, but the users can store their user information in this Cognito user pool. Okay, so this Cognito user pool usually handles the entire user's life cycle from sign up to the token expiration. So if you see here, it will do all the life cycle management, right? The user registration and logging and token management. Okay, and if the clients using this Cognito user pool set, the advantage is the API gateway can automatically verifies the identity of the users by integrating directly with Cognito. Since API gateway and Cognito are AWS resources and clients are validating their users with Cognito user base, right? And they will get a token. And when we hit the API gateway with the token, API gateway will directly go to the Cognito user pools and validate, authenticate the user and provide authorization also. Okay, so here you don't need to implement any custom authentication logic. Okay, if you send the token, right, you don't need to write any custom code. If you say I am using Cognito user pool, and if you provide that Cognito user pools ARN, then API gateway simply, right, you don't need to write any code. Simply take that token from the request and it will authenticate and authorize. No need to write any custom code here. Okay, so this authentication is managed by Cognito user pools and authorization is handled by API gateway methods itself. So you don't need to write any customization here. And if you want me to say any use case for this Cognito user pools, you can say managing external users securely. So this is one of the way. Okay, for your clarity, I am showing a flow diagram. So if you see here, we have a client and client is validating himself against the Cognito. So what he will do is first he will hit the Cognito service and get back the token. So the Cognito token. Then he frame a request with this token and send to API gateway. Now API gateway has the direct integration with Cognito. It will call the Cognito and validate this request and token. And right, this Cognito will validate the token, and if the token is valid, then API gateway send response to the backend. Otherwise, it will fail the client request. Okay, so this is how Cognito user pools works, and here you can manage your users. Now the other task is right before moving to the next topic. Here, right here also, if you see, we are dependent on AWS only. Here we are using a service called Cognito, which is AWS service. But what if you have some third party service which is like Cognito? It will do you authentication. Okay, so in that case, how to handle? So the lifesaver here is Lambda authorizers. Okay, so if you see about Lambda authorizers, these are custom authorization mechanism. This provides us custom authorization mechanism. Okay, so that you will get more flexibility in handling authentication. So here authentication you are not going to depend on AWS, right? Authentication you are going to do, but AWS will provide only authorization. So how this works, if you see, right, it is a token based authorization, maybe like JWT or OAuth. I hope you are heard about these things. JWT is JSON Web Tokens and OAuth. This both provides the tokenization aspect, right? They provides you token, and by using those bare tokens, you can able to authenticate your users. Okay, and also you can do request parameter based authentication, right? So here the authorizers uses request parameters like headers, query strings, or stage variables to decide whether to allow or deny the request. Okay, even you have policy IAM policy generation. So what will happen here is here you will have Lambda authorizers and you will send a token. So Lambda will authorize the token and it will return you an IAM policy. Once an IAM policy created, that means AWS provided authorization to you. From the subsequent request, AWS don't want to again hit the third party service. What it will do is it will cache that IAM policy for efficiency. Okay, so if you see the use case, it is flexible for third party token verification. Obviously, you don't want to manage your users inside the AWS, then this is the only way, and also you will get more flexibility when compared to remaining security features. Okay, so once the Lambda authorizes verifies the request, it returns an IAM policy. Okay, that determines whether the client can access. The result is cached, obviously, reducing the number of Lambda invocations needed. Okay, for your better understanding, I will show you a flow diagram. Here we have client. Client will send a request to third party user base or third party service. So this third party service will authenticate the user. Whether he is a valid user or not, this third party service authenticate and send back the bearer token to. So authenticate and generate the bearer token and send back to the client. And by using this bearer token, client will request with bearer token to the API gateway. Now API gateway also calls the now API now API gateway uses this request with bearer token and calls the Lambda authorizers. So this Lambda authorizers can able to hit the third party service and validate the request and bearer token. So it will validate the bearer token against the third party, and if the bearer token is valid, then it sends an IAM policy. So it creates an IAM policy and send to API gateway. So once an IAM policy got created, API gateway will do so created API gateway for efficiency. What it will do is it will cache that policy for the subsequent requests. Okay, instead of every time hitting the third party server. Okay, so that right you have the IAM policy attached. So IAM policy attached means you got so much authorization. So if you got the authorization, that means you can able to access different resources through API gateway. So here we are accessing the backend. Here the backend could be the Lambda or any other AWS services. Okay, here we are using Lambda for example. Okay, I hope you understand, right? What does Lambda authorizers provide? Here you have users in third-party server, right? You are authorizing them, sorry, you are authenticating them in the third-party service. But authorization can be happened, must be happened inside the API gateway by using this Lambda authorizers. Okay, so finally, in the summary, right? Let's summarize the key points. So whatever we discussed, we will summarize. First thing is IAM permissions. Best for internal AWS clients and handles both authentication and authorization. Obviously, right, if both client and the API gateway are in the same AWS account, then IAM permissions are the best choice. And resource based policies adds granularity. So even you can add granular level security here, and this is perfect for cross account access. So for example, your client is in account 1 and your API gateway in account 2. In that case, resource-based policies combined with IAM permissions is the better approach. And even you can add IPC, you can add IP restrictions or VPC restrictions. Okay. And after that, you can use the Cognito user pools. It simplifies the user management and authentication, as we know that. And it's great for application needing identity management without custom code. And if you don't want a custom code and you want to move your user base and maintain them in the AWS account, then Cognito user pools will be ideal choice for you. And you don't need to write any authentication logic here because AWS API gateway and Cognito user pools has direct integration. And finally, the Lambda authorizers. These are highly flexible and perfect for third-party token verification with custom IAM policy logic. Okay, so obviously, if you have users in your premises and you want to authorize them using the third-party service instead of using any AWS services, then you can use the Lambda authorizers, right? And this will have more flexibility to do more things. And here you will get a IAM policy and which will be cached for the subsequent requests. So, understanding these security mechanisms is essential for designing robust and secure APIs in AWS. Each method has its strength, and knowing when and where to apply them will help you build more secure applications. So, finally, security is non negotiable when it comes to APIs. Okay, and API Gateway provides versatile tools to ensure your APIs are protected. Whether you are managing users with Cognito, securing APIs with IAM policies, or implementing custom authorizers, there is a solution for your every need. Okay. Hey everyone. Until now, we have seen the AWS API Gateway security features in a theory lecture. Now we'll dive into hands-on session. So in this hands-on session, I'm not going in deeper. I'm going to show in a high level overview where you can add those security features. Okay, so the first one is whenever you created an API, right? Go to that API method. So if you go to that API method, for example, I created a resource called /test and I created a method get method inside the test. So whenever we want to authenticate or authorize and request, right? Entry point is method request because all the requests come into the method request only. So select the method request and if you scroll down, you will have the method request related settings available in this page. So if you see here, the authorization is none and API key required false, and you have some other few informations about request path, URL query string parameters, HTTP headers, and so on. So here the thing we are targeting is authorization. So if I click on edit here, you can able to see method request settings, right? Inside the method request settings, you will have an option called authorization where you have AWS IAM authorization. And we know when we have to use the AWS IAM authorization, if we have the service and the API both are resides in the same AWS account. Then, right, the service should have some IAM policy which will say to allow access to the AWS API gateway. So by using that IAM policy, right, the other service able to access API gateway. So whenever you say AWS IAM authentication, it will check that IAM policy, right? If the IAM policy is good, then AWS API gateway allow the other service to access its APIs. So likewise, you can able to enable AWS IAM authorization, and also in the request validator, right? You can able to select what you want to validate, whether you want to validate body, whether you want to validate body query string parameters and headers, whether you want to validate query strings and headers. Okay. So likewise, you can able to enable this AWS IAM permissions. That is our first topic, right? And I'm coming back to the method, the same method, right? And if you see here in our API, we have an section called resource policy, and you know when to use the resource policy, right? And this resource policy works along with IAM permissions to give more granular control. So I will show you how it will give more granular control. So once you come to this resource policy page, and if you click on this create policy button, you can able to see, you can able to write here and policy. And you can find, if you click on this link, you can find a number of policy examples. And there are a few templates also available readily. So we can use these templates. So here if you see, the first one is AWS account allow list. So if I use this, right, it is giving some template to us and you can edit based on your requirement. If you observe this particular JSON object or policy, here what we are saying is allow, right? Allow these principles. So what are those principles? Some IAM users, maybe users or some IAM roles or even a root user, right? From other account, not this account, right? You can able to provide other account details also. So even you can able to provide this account details and other account details also. So ideally this is useful when you have cross account collaboration or if you want to access your API from the different account. So here you can able to see, right, I have given other account related user information and role information, and I'm saying you can perform this action, that is invoke action on this particular API. Okay, so likewise you can able to add cross account communication, and after that you will have one more template, that is IP range deny list. So if you see here, we are denying particular IP addresses. So from this to this, right, this cider blocks IP addresses, if you provide, if any request coming from this particular IP addresses, we can block to execute API in AWS API gateway. Okay, so that is one more advantage, and another one is source VPC allow list. For example, you want to only allow your API gateway through only one VPC, right? Then you can provide that particular VPC ID here so that any request from other VPCs will denied only VPC, like only VPC what you are expecting, that VPC only able to, right, access your AWS API gateway. So likewise, by using this resource policies, you can ask these many granular details or granular level security features available in this resource based policies. Okay, and we know that these resource based policies are ideal to use when you have cross account communication. and you want to cross account access. And the final two things are authorizers, right? So if I go to the in the same API section, if you see here, you have authorizers section. So if I go to this authorizers and click on the create authorizer button, you can able to see in the authorizer type you have two options. One is Lambda, one is Cognito. So we have already discussed about Cognito, which is a user pool, user management, where you can able to manage users without any additional code, right? Everything readily available within the AWS, you just need to onboard it. So by using Cognito, you can provide that Cognito related information here, so that you can do authorization by using the Cognito itself, as we discussed in the theory section. And when it's come to Lambda, right, we know when we have to use the Lambda is when you want to do the custom authentication. So you can specify the Lambda, and inside the Lambda you need to write how to interact with the third party authorization service, sorry, authentication service, and get the token, and after that how to cache that AWS policy in the AWS API gateway. So you have to write all the logic in the Lambda, but when it comes to Cognito, everything on the fly will be happen with you for you with the help of AWS API Gateway, and Cognito has a direct integration. Okay, but if you choose Lambda because you have third-party integration available there, then you can go for a Lambda and write your custom logic in the Lambda code. Okay, this is another two types of authorizations. Okay, so and here you will have some other options also. I'm not going deeper here, but yeah, so these are the options you can enable and you can explore later if any use case required for adding these additional securities for you. Okay, so I hope you understand this hands-on part. This is very high level, and that is enough, right? You, if you want more, you can go to the documentation and enable these things. But yeah, so you know how to do and what to do. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more AWS content, tips, and tricks. See you next time. Bye.